It was a Tuesday afternoon when Dylan stormed into my living room. I was reading the newspaper in my favorite chair, the one my wife Martha had bought me for my 60th birthday. The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Dylan's face was red, his jaw clenched tight like he'd been grinding his teeth for hours. "Dad, we need to talk." His voice carried that edge I remembered from his teenage years when he wanted something expensive. Before I could ask what was wrong, his hand cracked across my left cheek. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a gunshot. My ears rang, my face burned, and suddenly my 32-year-old son was standing over me with eyes like chips of ice. "Sign the house over now, old man." I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. My hand went to my face instinctively, feeling the heat spreading across my skin. In 40 years of raising this boy, through all his tantrums and rebellions, he had never laid a hand on me. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence. Dylan's chest rose and fell rapidly, his fists still clenched at his sides. I realized then that he wasn't bluffing. Dylan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick packet of papers, shoving them onto my coffee table so hard my reading glasses jumped. These weren't rough drafts or blank forms. They were official transfer deeds, already filled out in neat black ink with his name typed in the recipient box. "Do it now, old man," he barked, pulling a pen from his shirt pocket and clicking it open. "Sign right there on the highlighted lines, or you'll regret it." My own son was treating me like a squatter in the house I'd built with my own hands 35 years ago. The house where I'd carried him as a baby, where he'd taken his first steps, where Martha had spent her final days fighting cancer. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt enormous, like holding a loaded weapon. Dylan leaned forward, his breath hot on my neck, watching every movement like a hawk circling prey. The signature line stared back at me, waiting. Harold Peterson, it would read. The name that had been on this deed since 1988. Instead of signing, I looked up at my son's face and asked the question that had been burning in my throat. "Why?" Dylan's expression twisted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before on his face. He leaned close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath and see the red veins in his eyes. "You're old, Dad. You don't need this big house anymore. I've got a wife and bills to pay. Don't be selfish." His voice carried no warmth, no trace of the little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read him bedtime stories. This was pure entitlement, like I owed him everything I'd worked for simply because he existed. I built this place brick by brick, working double shifts at the construction company to afford the mortgage. I'd bled actual blood into these foundations, scraped my knuckles raw hanging drywall, spent weekends for 2 years installing every fixture and fitting. Yet Dylan acted like it was his birthright, like I'd been keeping something from him that rightfully belonged to him all along. I realized this wasn't a conversation between father and son. This was a robbery, plain and simple. Whose idea was this? I asked quietly. Dylan's eyes flickered toward the window, and I knew. "Amber thinks it's smart planning," Dylan said, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality like he was reciting talking points. "She says if we wait until you die, the house will be tied up in probate for months, maybe years. This way, it's clean and simple." He spoke so casually about my death, like it was an inconvenient delay in their financial planning rather than the end of a human life. My chest tightened as the full scope of their scheming became clear. This wasn't just Dylan's greed talking. This was a calculated conspiracy between my son and his wife of 3 years. Amber, who smiled sweetly at family dinners while apparently plotting to steal my home the moment my back was turned. "She's done the research," Dylan continued, warming to his subject. "Property transfer while you're alive avoids estate taxes, avoids complications with relatives who might contest the will. It's really the smart thing to do. The smart thing to do. For them." I nodded slowly, letting him think I was considering his words. But inside, my mind was racing through possibilities, through defenses, through secrets they couldn't possibly know about. Because there was something Dylan and his calculating wife didn't know about this house. Years earlier, after Martha's cancer diagnosis, I had visited a lawyer downtown. Not the family attorney who'd handled our wills, but a specialist in estate planning named Mr. Blake. Together, we had drawn up a living trust with very specific terms and protections. The house wasn't just deeded to Harold Peterson anymore. It was held by the Peterson Family Trust, with conditions that made it nearly impossible to transfer without meeting certain requirements. Requirements that Dylan knew nothing about. I had kept the paperwork in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with Martha's jewelry and my father's war medals. The original will still sat in our filing cabinet, but it was essentially meaningless now. The real power was in that trust document. Dylan didn't know it existed. In all his planning with Amber, in all their research about probate and estate taxes, they had assumed this was a simple property transfer between father and son. Their ignorance was about to become my most powerful weapon. I could smile through the sting of his slap, because I realized I held all the cards in a game they didn't even know they were playing. So I decided to let them think they were winning. I slumped deeper into my chair, letting my shoulders sag and my breathing become labored. "All right, son," I wheezed, pressing a hand to my chest like the stress was affecting my heart. "This is all so sudden. Just give me some time to think it through." Dylan's posture immediately relaxed. The tension in his jaw eased, and something like satisfaction flickered across his features. He thought my weakness was real, that his intimidation had worked exactly as planned. "That's better, Dad. I knew you'd see reason." He tucked the papers back into his briefcase with the careful movements of a man who believed he'd already won. "Take a day or two, but don't take too long. Amber's already picked out new furniture." He patted my shoulder like I was a stubborn child who had finally agreed to take his medicine. The condescension in that gesture made my teeth clench, but I kept my expression neutral and defeated. "I understand, son. You're probably right about the practical side of things." Dylan smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. But behind my closed lips, I was biting back laughter, because I'd already decided exactly how this game was going to end. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank on Maple Street. The security guard nodded at me like always. I'd been coming here for 15 years, ever since Martha and I opened our first joint account. He probably thought I was just making a routine deposit. I signed the logbook with steady hands and followed the bank employee down to the vault. The safety deposit box key felt warm in my palm, and when I slid it into the lock, I heard that satisfying double click that meant the mechanism was opening. Inside the narrow metal drawer lay everything Dylan and Amber thought they understood about my finances, and everything they had no clue about. Martha's engagement ring, still sparkling after 40 years. My father's Purple Heart from Korea. And underneath it all, the manila folder containing the Peterson family trust documents. I pulled out the folder and opened it right there in the vault. The legal language was dense, but Mr. Blake had explained every clause to me 3 years ago. The trust protected the house from exactly this kind of coercion. As I read through the conditions and safeguards Martha and I had put in place, my pulse steadied. If Dylan wanted war, he was walking straight into a trap that had been set long before he and Amber ever dreamed of stealing my home. That evening, I called Dylan's house. Amber answered on the third ring, her voice artificially sweet the way it always was when she wanted something from me. "Harold, how lovely to hear from you. Dylan told me about your conversation yesterday." "I'll bet he did," I thought. "Would you and Dylan like to come by for dinner tonight? I've been thinking about what he said, and I'd like to talk it through with both of you." There was a pause. Then I heard muffled conversation as she covered the phone to speak with Dylan. When she came back on the line, she sounded almost giddy with anticipation. "We'd love to come over. What time should we be there?" 6:30. "I'll make Dylan's favorite, roast chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans." I spent the afternoon cooking, really cooking, the way Martha used to when we had company. The chicken came out golden and perfect, the potatoes were creamy, and I even made gravy from scratch. They arrived right on time, both dressed up like they were already lords of the manor they thought they were about to inherit. Dylan kissed my cheek, the same one he'd slapped 24 hours earlier, and Amber complimented the smell of dinner. They didn't know I had just armed myself with all the ammunition I needed for what came next. We ate dinner like a normal family. Dylan told me about his job at the insurance company, Amber talked about her book club, and I played the part of the agreeable father perfectly. I complimented Amber's new haircut and asked Dylan about his golf game. When I brought out dessert, peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream, they both relaxed completely. This was going exactly as they'd hoped. The old man was softening up, ready to hand over his life's work without a fight. Amber took a bite of cobbler and made appreciative sounds. "Harold, this is delicious. You're such a wonderful cook." Then, as casually as commenting on the weather, she added. So, have you had a chance to think about those papers Dylan showed you? I dabbed my lips with my napkin and looked across the table at both of them. Their eyes were bright with expectation, like slot machines about to hit the jackpot. I've been thinking about it all day, I said slowly. And maybe you're right. Maybe it would be easier to handle things now rather than leave you dealing with legal complications later. They leaned forward almost in unison, Dylan's fork suspended halfway to his mouth. But I do have one small condition. I set down my napkin and looked directly at Amber. I'll sign the papers, but only if your name stays off the deed completely. This transfer will be from me to Dylan only, as my biological son. No joint ownership, no spousal claims. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Amber's smile froze on her face, then slowly cracked around the edges. Dylan looked confused, glancing back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. Dad, that doesn't make sense, Dylan started. Amber and I are married. In Colorado, spouses automatically have certain property rights. Not if the deed specifically excludes spousal interest, I interrupted. Which it will. That's my condition. Take it or leave it. Amber's mask had slipped completely now. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by something harder and hungrier. Harold, I don't understand why you don't trust me. After everything I've done for Dylan, for this family. What exactly have you done for this family? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Dylan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I had just drawn the first battle line, and I could see the first crack appearing in their armor. Amber's face flushed red, and her voice rose to match her color. What have I done? I've supported Dylan through every career change, every setback. I've hosted your birthday dinners, brought you Christmas presents, listened to your stories about the old days. She slammed her fork down on her plate, making the ice cream jump. You don't trust me? After all I've done to be part of this family. Her voice had turned sharp and bitter, nothing like the sweet tone she'd used on the phone. Dylan reached for her hand, but she pulled away from him. Amber, honey, calm down. No, I won't calm down. She turned on Dylan with the same fury she'd been directing at me. This is exactly what I told you would happen. He wants to control everything, even from beyond the grave. He doesn't respect our marriage, doesn't respect me. I watched this performance with fascination. This was who Amber really was underneath all the Sunday dinner politeness and fake concern about my well-being. This was the woman who had convinced my son to slap me and steal my house. I'm trying to be fair to everyone, I said mildly. But Amber was just getting started, and I could see Dylan's confidence beginning to waver as his wife revealed her true nature right in front of him. The mask was completely off now. After they left, Amber storming out while Dylan trailed behind, making apologetic gestures. I waited exactly 1 hour, then picked up the phone and dialed the number I'd memorized 3 years ago. Blake and Associates, this is Theodore Blake. Mr. Blake, this is Harold Peterson. We set up a family trust together back in 2020. Harold, of course. How can I help you? I told him everything. About Dylan's visit, the slap, the forged-looking papers, Amber's reaction to being excluded from the deed. Mr. Blake listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. So they don't know about the trust at all? He asked when I finished. Not a clue. They think this is a simple property transfer between father and son. Well, they're about to get quite an education in estate law. The trust makes any coerced transfer null and void automatically. But Harold, if your son actually struck you, this might be a criminal matter. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, at the faint bruise still visible on my left cheek. What would you recommend? Let them dig their own grave a little deeper first. Then we'll be ready with everything we need. 4 days later, Dylan showed up at my door again. This time he wasn't angry. He was smug, carrying himself like a man who held all the cards. He had a manila envelope in his hand and a satisfied smile on his face. Dad, I've got good news. You don't need to worry about signing anything anymore. He pulled out a set of papers and spread them on my kitchen table. Property transfer forms, filled out completely, with what looked like my signature at the bottom of each page. The signature was a decent imitation of my handwriting, but not perfect. Someone had practiced copying my name, probably from old birthday cards or Christmas checks. It was close enough to fool a casual observer, but any handwriting expert would spot it immediately. Too late for conditions now, Dad. Amber and I don't need your cooperation anymore. My stomach clenched, not with fear, but with rage. Forgery was a felony in Colorado. My son had just crossed from family dispute into serious criminal territory. But he wasn't done showing me how far he'd fallen. We've already filed these with the county clerk's office. As far as the state of Colorado is concerned, this house belongs to me now. He was waving the forged papers in my face like a trophy. What Dylan didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had installed a small digital recorder in the kitchen table drawer. The kind private investigators use, no bigger than a deck of cards, with a microphone sensitive enough to pick up whispered conversations. I had turned it on the moment he walked through my door. Every word of his confession about the forged signatures was being captured in crystal-clear digital audio. His voice bragging about filing false documents with the county. His admission that he and Amber had conspired to steal my property without my consent. The house is ours now, old man. You can live here as our guest, or you can find somewhere else to go. But either way, you'll follow our rules now. My hands trembled as I listened to him outline their plans. They intended to refinance the property immediately, taking out a large mortgage against the equity I'd built up over 35 years. They were going to use my home as their personal ATM. When Dylan finally left, taking his forged papers with him, I sat alone in my kitchen and replayed the recording. His voice filled the room, casual and confident as he described his crimes. I had exactly what I needed now. I knew exactly who needed to hear it. The next morning, I drove to the county sheriff's office on 3rd Street. I had dressed in my best suit, the navy blue one Martha had bought me for Dylan's high school graduation, and carried a briefcase containing the digital recorder, printed transcripts, and photos of the bruise on my face. The desk sergeant was a woman about Dylan's age with kind eyes and the patient manner of someone who dealt with family disputes every day. She probably expected another complaint about loud neighbors or property line disagreements. I need to report a crime, I said. My son has forged my signature on legal documents and filed them with the county clerk to steal my house. Her expression shifted immediately from routine politeness to sharp attention. Sir, that's a very serious allegation. Do you have evidence? I opened my briefcase and pulled out the small recorder. Would you like to hear him confess to it? I pressed play, and Dylan's voice filled the small office. We've already filed these with the county clerk's office. As far as the state of Colorado is concerned, this house belongs to me now. The sergeant's face hardened as she listened. By the time the recording ended, she was already reaching for her phone. Suddenly, I wasn't just a father betrayed by his son. I was a crime victim with evidence. A week later, I was watching the evening news when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding, with the kind of desperate urgency that rattled the frame and made my coffee cup jump on the table. Through the peephole, I could see Dylan's face, pale and sweating despite the cool evening air. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes had the wild look of a man who'd just realized how much trouble he was in. Dad, open up. What did you do? I took my time unlocking the deadbolt and the chain. Dylan pushed past me the moment the door opened, spinning around in my entryway like a trapped animal. What did you do, old man? His voice cracked with panic. The sheriff's office called me today. They want to interview me about forged documents. They said someone filed a complaint. 2 deputies stepped out of the patrol car parked in my driveway. Through the window, I could see neighbors gathering on their porches, drawn by the unusual excitement of police cars on our quiet street. Dylan saw the lights too and went completely white. Dad, please, call them off. We can work this out as a family. The knock on my door was firm but polite. Sheriff's Department. We're looking for Dylan Peterson. I opened the door to find Deputy Rodriguez, a tall man with calm eyes and a professional bearing. Behind him stood a female deputy whose hand rested casually near her service weapon. Mr. Peterson, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of forgery and filing false instruments. Dylan's legs seemed to give out. He slumped against my wall, all his arrogance finally deflated. The transformation was remarkable. From threatening son to frightened criminal in the space of a week. You have the right to remain silent. They cuffed him right there in my living room while I watched from my chair. My face still carried the faint yellow remnants of his slap, but justice was about to balance those scales. As they led him toward the door, Dylan looked back at me with something that might have been regret. But it was far too late for regret. The next morning, Amber showed up at my house before 8 o'clock. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her designer clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. The confident woman who'd schemed to steal my house was gone, replaced by someone desperate and panicked. Harold, please. You have to drop the charges. Dylan is my husband. He's not a criminal. She alternated between begging and threatening, cycling through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. First, she tried tears, sobbing about how much they loved each other and how this would destroy their marriage. When that didn't work, she switched to anger. You're ruining his life over what? A piece of paper? A house you won't even need much longer anyway. Then came the threats. Dylan has friends in this town, Harold. Important friends. You can't treat our family this way and expect there to be no consequences. I sat in my chair, listening to her performance with the same detached interest I might watch a movie. None of this was going to change anything. The evidence was already filed, the charges were already pressed. She had no power here, and we both knew it. But then she made a mistake that revealed just how deep their conspiracy went. Dylan told me about your late wife's savings account. My blood went cold. Martha's savings account had been closed for 2 years, but there had been a separate education fund, money we'd set aside for grandchildren we never had. Money that was supposed to go to Dylan eventually, but only after I was gone, and only if he proved himself worthy of it. Amber's sneer told me everything I needed to know about their long-term plans. $23,000, sitting in First National Bank, just waiting. Did you really think we hadn't done our research? We know about all your accounts, Harold. The house was just the beginning. They hadn't just planned to steal my home. They had been plotting to drain every penny I'd saved, every dollar Martha and I had scraped together during 40 years of marriage. Their greed was bottomless, their betrayal complete. We could have done this the easy way, Amber continued. You could have signed the papers, moved into a nice retirement home, and everyone would have been happy. But now Dylan's facing jail time because you're too selfish to let go of things you can't take with you anyway. I stood up slowly from my chair, and something in my expression made her take a step backward. Get out of my house. Harold, I'm trying to help you understand. Get out. Now. She left, but not before promising me that this wasn't over, that I'd regret turning my back on family. I was already preparing my final strike. The courthouse on Pine Street buzzed with the quiet activity of legal proceedings. I had arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase containing everything Mr. Blake and I had prepared for this moment. Dylan sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by a court-appointed attorney who looked like he was barely out of law school. Amber sat in the gallery behind him, her face hard with resentment. The prosecutor was a competent woman in her 40s who had reviewed all my evidence with professional thoroughness. She'd told me this was one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse and fraud she'd seen in years. Your Honor, she began, the defendant systematically planned to defraud his elderly father of his primary residence through forged documents, intimidation, and filing false instruments with the county clerk's office. She played the recording I'd made of Dylan's confession. His voice filled the courtroom, casual and confident as he described his crimes. As far as the state of Colorado is concerned, this house belongs to me now. The judge's expression grew harder with each revelation. But the prosecution's case was just the opening act. Mr. Blake had saved our best evidence for last. My attorney stood and approached the bench with a thick folder in his hands. Your Honor, the defense has claimed this was a family dispute over inheritance planning. I'd like to present evidence that proves otherwise. He opened the folder and pulled out the Peterson Family Trust documents, official and notarized, dated 3 years before Dylan's assault on his father. This property has been held in trust since 2020, with specific protections against exactly this type of coercion. Any attempt to transfer the property under duress is automatically null and void. Gasps rippled through the small courtroom. Dylan's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear, but Dylan just stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Amber's face had gone completely white. She was beginning to understand that everything they'd planned, everything they'd researched about property law and estate taxes had been based on completely false assumptions. The house had never been vulnerable to their schemes. It had been protected all along. Mr. Blake continued presenting evidence methodically, destroying every aspect of their defense. Furthermore, Your Honor, the defendant's own recorded statements prove this was not a family discussion about inheritance, but a calculated criminal conspiracy. The judge turned to look directly at Dylan. Judge Williams was an older man with silver hair and the kind of steady bearing that came from 30 years on the bench. He'd heard every excuse, seen every scheme, and his patience for criminals who preyed on elderly family members was notoriously thin. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice cutting through the courtroom silence, "you have been found guilty of forgery in the second degree, filing false instruments, and attempted theft by deception. These are serious felonies that carry significant penalties." Dylan's shoulders shook as he realized the full weight of what was about to happen to him. "You physically assaulted your elderly father, forged his signature on legal documents, and conspired with your wife to defraud him of his life's work. This court views elder abuse with particular severity." The judge paused, letting his words sink in. "You are sentenced to 18 months in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will also pay restitution of $15,000 to cover your father's legal expenses and emotional damages." Amber gasped from the gallery. Dylan's attorney started to object, but the judge held up his hand for silence. "Additionally, you are hereby prohibited from contacting your father or coming within 500 feet of his property for a period of 5 years. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through the courtroom. Justice had been served. As the deputies led Dylan away in handcuffs, I remained seated in the gallery, watching my son shuffle toward a future he'd chosen for himself. There was no satisfaction in seeing him brought low, only a deep sadness for the man he might have been. When he passed my row, Dylan stopped and looked at me directly for the first time since his arrest. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood up slowly and met his eyes. For just a moment, I saw the little boy who used to help me in the garage, who'd bring me tools and ask endless questions about how things worked. "You slapped me in my own home and tried to steal everything your mother and I built together," I said quietly. "You chose money over family, Dylan. But you didn't just lose the house, you lost me." His eyes filled with tears, but there was nothing left to say between us. The deputies led him toward the door that would take him away from everything he'd tried to steal. I turned and walked toward the door that would take me home. The house was still mine, but the cost of keeping it had been higher than I ever imagined. Still, some prices are worth paying. Over the following months, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made the house truly mine again. Fresh paint in every room, new locks on every door, updated appliances in the kitchen where Martha used to cook our family meals. I hired a landscaping crew to restore the garden that had grown wild during my legal battles. They planted new roses, repaired the stone walkway, and brought back the beauty Martha and I had created together so many years ago. Neighbors stopped by regularly now, bringing casseroles and staying for coffee. Mrs. Chun from next door helped me organize a weekly poker game in my dining room. The Johnsons across the street invited me to their grandson's birthday party. I started hosting Sunday dinners again, filling the house with laughter and conversation the way it was meant to be filled. Friends, neighbors, decent people who understood that family wasn't just about blood relations. My home was mine again, untouched by greed, unbroken by betrayal. The only reminder of Dylan's assault was a small scar on my left cheek, where his ring had cut me. Sometimes, when I shaved in the morning, I caught sight of it in the mirror. It served as a permanent reminder of what happened when family turned against family. Now I tell this story not for sympathy, but as a warning to anyone who thinks family betrayal gives them license to commit crimes. Dylan thought he could take what I built with a slap and a forged signature. Instead, he learned that actions have consequences, and some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. I'm 72 years old now, living alone in the house Martha and I bought as newlyweds. Some people might see that as sad, but I see it as victory. This home remains exactly what we intended it to be, a place built on love and hard work, not stolen through violence and deception. Dylan got out of prison 8 months ago. I heard through mutual friends that he and Amber divorced while he was incarcerated. She'd apparently found someone else to support her lifestyle, someone whose father wasn't quite as prepared to fight back. He's never tried to contact me, which is probably for the best. The restraining order expired, but some distances are bigger than court orders. If you ever find yourself facing betrayal like mine, remember this: revenge doesn't always require violence or anger. Sometimes it just requires patience preparation, and the willingness to let people reveal their true nature. And sometimes, the most powerful weapon you can carry is simply the truth.